A very good evening to all of you. So I want to thank the organizers for giving me an opportunity to be part of this PG assembly. So now that the basic principles of neuroanesthesia are clear to all of you, I'll be discussing the anesthetic management of a patient with posterior fossa tumor. So what makes the posterior fossa so important? Well, there are many vital structures present here, such as midbrain, pons, medulla oblongata, cranial nerves 3 to 12, the various ascending and the descending motor and the sensory pathways traverse from here. There are venous sinuses present here in the dural folds, the narrow cerebral aqueduct and the fourth ventricle is present here. The major blood vessels transverse from here, as well as the reticular activating system, which is responsible for our consciousness, can be found in the posterior fossa. So we have a case scenario in which a 19 years old young male was admitted with chief complaints of difficulty in walking for last 1 month, nasal regurgitation of fluids for last 2 months, and headache with vomiting for last 3 months. Now, difficulty in walking, it can be a cerebral sign as well as a cerebellar sign, which is because of the presence of ataxia. Nasal regurgitation of fluids is usually due to the involvement of the lower cranial nerves, and headache and with vomiting, it indicates then increased intracranial pressure. So from the chief complaint itself, we can say that this patient has some intracranial pathology, and most probably the lesion is in the posterior fossa. So these patients often present with features of raised ICP and hydrocephalus, such as headache, nausea, vomiting, drowsiness, and blurred vision. The cerebellar signs such as ataxia, dysmetria, and dysdiadokinesia, and the various manifestations of the cranial nerve involvement, like uh, ranging from involvement of the cranial nerve 3 to 12. So for the diagnosis of the brain tumor, we have to get a CT and MRI brain done. So as we can see in this patient, we can see a cerebellar SOL. This is clearly visible, and this is in the posterior fossa below the tentorial, below the tentorium. This is a brainstem glioma, and we can see it is shifting the cerebellum away. And all these are stationed in the infratentorial compartment, that is the posterior fossa. Pineal gland tumors are, although they are not strictly in the posterior fossa, but their surgical approach usually is the supracerebellar and infratentorial. So there the anesthetic and the surgical concerns are more or less same as for any patient having posterior fossa tumors. The challenges in this patient will be the major vital structures involvement, the small space in the posterior fossa. Then for the surgery, we require different positions mostly other than supine. So these can be sitting, prone, lateral or semi-prone. The presence of hydrocephalus in these patients, the chances of venous air embolism and high incidence of pneumocephalus, though depending upon the position used in these patients during surgery. And often these patients have a protracted post-operative course, and often these require long-term mechanical ventilation and tracheostomy. Many times these become the patients of brainstem glioma, especially, they become ventilator dependent. So whenever such a patient comes, the main concerns we have to look for in a patient during a pre-anesthetic checkup will be whether there is brainstem or the cranial nerve dysfunction. This is important because of the cranial nerve dysfunction. Patient may have aspiration pneumonia, and a decision for ventilation in the post-operative period also depends upon the cranial nerve involvement in the pre-operative period. Patient has elevated intracranial pressure or not, and whether any shunting procedure has been done pre-op or not, the potential for the blood loss, and accordingly we have to arrange blood. The position, discuss with the surgeon and ask in which position will the patient be operated, and accordingly we have to arrange, we have to make the OT ready for that position and keep the equipment ready. Assess the risk of VA in that position, and accordingly arrange the monitors which we intend to use intraoperatively for monitoring of VAE. And also ask the surgeon if he wants to do the evoked potential monitoring or the facial nerve monitoring, and then we have to modify our anesthetic technique accordingly. The goals of anesthesia are to maintain the cerebral perfusion pressure and stable hemodynamics. We have to ensure proper positioning of the patient, try to prevent, detect, and prompt treatment of VA is very important. We have to facilitate electrophysiological monitoring and aim for early and smooth emergence. Pre-medication, we usually avoid sedatives because they interfere with assessment of neurological status. Moreover, if any respiratory depression in these patients can be very dangerous. A mild anxiolytic can be given in extreme, if the patient has extreme anxiety, and a very short-acting anxiolytic like alprazolam can be given at the bedtime, but that has to be given only under strict supervision. Anti-cyanogogues may be given to decrease the secretions and wetting of the endotracheal tube tapes intraoperatively, and this depends upon your institutional protocol. Well, they are quite helpful, especially in the prone position. So induction and maintenance of the anesthesia. First of all, we secure a venous line and attach all the non-invasive monitors. The induction remains the standard as for any neurosurgical patient. We intubate in the standard manner, but often instead of the Portex, we use flexometallic tube in these patients as they are positioned in extreme neck flexion. So the normal PVC Portex tube can get kinked. So to avoid that, we use flexometallic tube. Maintenance of anesthesia is also standard with oxygen nitrous, volatile or TIVA, and with opioids and muscle relaxants. The monitors that we need intraoperatively are the arterial line for beat-to-beat monitoring of the blood pressure, as well as for the intermittent ABG analysis intraoperatively. But remember that the transducer has to be zeroed at the level of the tragus. Central venous line is often inserted in these patients because there is often, these surgeries are often last for a long time, and there is significant blood loss. Moreover, for aspiration, although not very practical, but we can also aspirate air from the multi-orifice central venous catheter. The other monitors for VA, depending upon the position the patient is being placed, you can place a TE transesophageal echocardiography, or a precaudal Doppler can be placed. End-tidal CO2 is the standard monitor, and oxygen saturation we use in every patient. Electrophysiological monitoring, whether the patient is having brainstem evoked potential monitoring, SSCP can be monitored in these patients along with motor evoked potentials, as well as facial nerve monitoring is usually done. The lower cranial nerve monitoring is done in some centers, but usually it is not very frequently done because we need equipment for that, which we don't have right now. Best for the depth of anesthesia as well as the neuromuscular monitoring can be done if we are avoiding, especially if we are this monitoring the facial nerve, we have to give 2/3 of the dose of the muscle relaxants, or totally we can avoid it. Now, for the placement of the CVP, it is very important for the aspiration of the air that it should be at the right position. So for this, we can place the right atrial catheter by using different techniques. Either we can use an ECG guided RAC insertion technique, or we can use a pressure transducer system. We can even get a chest X-ray done to see the right position of the CVP. And the other thing is we can do it TE transesophageal echocardiography guided insertion. So for the ECG guided insertion, we use a specially adaptive conductive connector placed on the right atrial line. ECG monitor is set for lead 2, and by observing the ECG trace, the catheter is manipulated. At the desired position, P wave is slightly smaller than the QRS complex. In this patient, we can see the TE probe is being inserted. So we can see a 4-chamber view, and the dot, the speck, which is visible here, it is showing the placement of the CVP catheter. So what are the advantages of the sitting position? I'll not be going into the details. This is given in each and every book. You can go through it and learn it. So it improves the surgical exposure, and as it improves the venous drainage from the surgical field, the ICP is low. There's better homeostasis and better drainage of the CSF and the blood away from the operative field, so they have a more clear field. For the anesthesiologist, there is improved access to the tracheal tube, chest wall, and arms. There is free diaphragmatic movement, as a result of which the FRC is increased. There we are able to observe the face, and there is better surgical teaching due to non-rotated anatomical situation. The surgical time is often shorter in sitting position. But these is also associated with many physiological changes. Some are advantageous and some are not. So coming to the central nervous system, compared to the supine position, in the sitting position, the main benefit is there is decrease in the ICP. CPP remains almost the same, and there is good cerebral, venous, and CSF drainage. So this is good for the decreasing the ICP and a better, cleaner surgical field. In the sitting position, TLC and FRC is increased, which results in V/Q mismatch, and there is less atelectasis in the lungs. Cardiovascular changes are very important, and what happens at there is, because of the venous pooling, there is decrease in the venous return and decrease in the cardiac output. As a result of which heart rate increases, systemic vascular resistance increases. Overall, there is decrease in the mean arterial pressure. So um, the risk associated with the sitting position are venous air embolism, there is chance of paradoxical air embolism, the hypotension, pneumocephalus, paraplegia and quadriplegia and macroglossia occurs because of the extreme neck flexion, which can cause a cervical cord stretching. The contraindications, the absolute contraindication is the presence of the ventricular-atrial shunt. The others are presence of a large patent foramen ovale, extremes of age, and cerebral insufficiency when in upright position. So before positioning, ensure that you inflate the pneumatic calf pumps. So this will decrease the venous stasis in the legs. Preload the patient with around 5 to 10 ml per kg of crystalloid. Ensure that while the pin is being inserted, you give some local anesthesia at that site, and ensure that when you make the patient sitting, do it very gradually with alternate movements of the head end and the leg end of the bed. There should be minimal blackout. Try to keep the arterial transducer in place so that you are able to see the blood pressure of the patient. This is a very risky period when hypertension is very commonly occurs. So we have to take care that the page, some or the other monitor is attached. Ensure 2 finger breadth space between the chin and the sternum. This I'll be showing you. So as you can see now that the patient is placed in a sitting position, we have to ensure that there is a 2 finger breadth distance between the chin and the chest. This is very important. Also, pad all the pressure points. Take care of the sciatic nerve, the common peroneal nerve at the knee. All the peripheral nerves have to be taken care of. Also, it's very important that after the positioning, because the neck is flexed, so you have to check for the bilateral air entry again, because endotracheal tube might move ahead and it can be converted into a endobronchial intubation. So auscultate for the bilateral air entry again, and also adjust your TE probe. It also might move a little inside, so you have to adjust your monitors. So after all the monitors are placed and the patient is placed in a sitting position, this is how the OT looks with all the monitors attached. It's a small space for the anesthetist to work in. So what happens? All of a sudden now we see that the EtCO2 is decreased. It was 35 and now it has all of a sudden it has come down to 30. So what will you think? A sudden and sustained decrease in the EtCO2 of 3 to 5 mmHg usually indicates the occurrence of the VAE and VAE. So what are the manifestations in the cardiovascular? You can see hypertension, changes in the heart sounds, murmurs, ECG evidence of ischemia may be seen, such as ST changes can be seen, and in extreme cases, a cardiac arrest may occur. The pulmonary changes are very common and the earliest to show. So what will you have? You will have a decrease in the EtCO2, but your PaCO2 will increase. This is because of the V/Q mismatch, and there will be hypercarbia, hypoxemia, pulmonary hypertension, and pulmonary edema, and only in extreme cases. So we have to use the monitors for the detection of the VAE, and these can be a transesophageal echocardiogram, precordial Doppler, pulmonary artery catheter, although we don't insert it anymore because of its safety concerns, capnography, and the end-tidal nitrogen. Out of these, the TE is the most sensitive invasive monitor, And the precordial Doppler is the most sensitive non-invasive monitor. It is usually placed in the third to sixth intercostal space on the right side, and we can hear a mill wheel murmur when VAE occurs. On the capnography, it is non-invasive, sensitive, and it is quantitative. The main advantage is that it is able to detect almost all of the hemodynamically significant VAE episodes. So it is also cheap and a good monitor for detection of hemodynamically significant VAE. End-tidal nitrogen is specific for air. It is a more specific monitor as it can detect air. Another thing, the advantages of TAE is that it can also detect air on the left side of the heart in the aorta. Treatment, what to do once it happens. So inform the surgeon immediately that VAE has occurred. Discontinue nitrous oxide if you are giving. Ask the surgeon to flood the surgical field with fluids. Provide jugular vein compression. Aspirate from right atrial catheter and to give the supportive treatment. So this you will be asked in your examination. So these things should be on your tips. Just to highlight, for the post-operative patient, you have to monitor this patient with ECG and chest X-ray in the post-operative period, and also see for the thrombocytopenia or the coagulation abnormalities in the post-operative period. So what are the complications? As we've already discussed, the hypotension, venous air embolism, tension pneumocephalus or pneumocephalus, macroglossia. Macroglossia occurs because of the impaired venous drainage from the face because of the extreme flexion of the neck. Quadriplegia also occurs because of the same reason. Extreme neck flexion causes mechanical compression of the cord and stretching of the spinal vessels, and peripheral nerve injuries can also occur in a patient placed in a sitting position. So what are the other positions? Prone position, I'll not be going into the details, just highlighting the salient points. Ensure that all the pressure points are padded and your abdomen is free. Park bench position, note this axillary roll, although it is known as the axillary roll, but it is not placed in the axilla, it is placed in the lower chest, and we have to ensure that the axilla is free. Maintenance of the anesthesia. Now we can maintain the patient on volatile or the TIVA, but it has been seen that the threshold for transpulmonary passage of venous air is higher during TIVA. So many centers prefer TIVA as for the maintenance of anesthesia. PEEP may increase the likelihood of pulmonary artery embolism after VAE has occurred. Nitrous oxide, it can be safely used in sitting position till the end, but one has to be very watchful for VAE and switch it off as soon as VAE is detected. For pneumocephalus, the incorporation of nitrous oxide in anesthetic regime has no substantial effect on amount of intracranial air detected after posterior fossa procedures performed in seated positions. Coming to the emergence. So our decision to extubate the patient depends upon the preoperative consciousness, state of the lower cranial nerves, intraoperative course, and brainstem handling. We have to ensure that if for example, if the patient has intact neurological status preoperatively and all the cranial nerves are intact and intraoperative course is also smooth, so we can extubate this patient, but we have to ensure, keeping all the principles of neuroanesthesia in mind, that it has to be very smooth. The postoperative complications, pneumocephalus, seen in almost 100% of the cases. Hematoma can occur because of the inadequate hemostasis. Postoperative nausea, vomiting, pain. Pain is more as compared to the supratentorial procedures. Hydrocephalus is very common, as I've already told you that the cerebral aqueduct is very narrow, and any minimal edema can also cause compression of the aqueduct, giving rise to the obstructive hydrocephalus. Respiratory disorders, swallowing disorders, and cardiovascular disorders are commonly seen in the postoperative period because of the involvement of the vital centers which are present in the posterior fossa. So coming to the complication pneumocephalus, I want to discuss. The patient will often present having delayed recovery. He'll complain of headache if he is conscious. There will be neurological deficit. Watch for vocal neurological deficits. The patient may be confused, agitated, and he may even present with seizures. So get a CT, post-operative CT done, and the picture, if the patient has pneumocephalus, you will be able to appreciate air in the intracranial cavity. This is known as a Mount Fuji sign. As we can see, the two peaks of the cerebral separated by the air in between. So treatment is high flow oxygen, and in case of tension pneumocephalus, we need burhole and aspiration of air. To conclude, the posterior fossa surgery is a challenging job. The anesthetic management, we have to follow the basic principles of neuroanesthesia. The positioning is challenging and we need to be very careful and ensure safe positioning. Be vigilant for intraoperative complications and promptly manage them. Thank you. Any questions?